English football is about to change forever, and unsurprisingly, money is the most important factor as to why. 160 years ago in 1863, football as we know it was invented, and just 25 years later, we saw the English Football League come into establishment, with 12 founding members starting a chain effect that would dominate English football for over a century. But then, as we drew closer to the new millennium, football was changing more and more with each decade that passed by, until we reached the 1980s, arguably the most defining decade in football history. Going into the 80s, English football was the dominant force worldwide, with sides from England winning 6 European Cups in a row by 1982. But with this success came a grim footballing culture. Violence, racism and so much more was rife, and in 1985, after a slight decline in English dominance in Europe, we saw the Heysel Stadium disaster, which would lead to the suspension of English teams from all European competitions for 5 years. Not only this, but we'd entered a time in which more and more clubs were entering a dangerous level of debt, and many were starting to fold due to little to no televised live football, meaning teams missed out on a huge potential source of income, with attendances getting lower and lower due to the increased danger I'd mentioned earlier. Something had to change, and so in came the Premier League, a breakaway division quite literally centred around making money, and supposedly preventing those at the top from ever facing financial issues again. And this week we heard the news that a very important meeting will be taking place in the coming days, in a change that may dictate football just as much as the Premier League did 3 decades ago. This is the story of how football may just be about to swing even further in the direction on focusing on financial gain rather than the enjoyment of fans. As I mentioned, in 1992, the English Premier League was formed, seeing the value of TV deals rise from £191 million at the start of the 92-93 season to a remarkable £5.136 billion by 2016. But this video isn't about that. It's about the meeting I mentioned that is taking place in the upcoming week, which is set to see the biggest change to English football since the formation of the Premier League 30 years ago. And if the planned proposals go through, it will arguably affect those in the lower divisions even more than the Premier League had. Now, as somebody who supports a League 2 side, but is employed pretty much to solely talk about the Prem and the biggest leagues worldwide, I feel like I'm in a fair position to actually give an unbiased opinion and explain what this may mean. So let's get on to what the meeting will be about. According to various sources, with the Times being the first to break the news I believe, 6 of the most important footballing figures in England, from the Premier League, FA and EFL, will be meeting in person to negotiate potential plans for a quote-unquote radical shake-up of the English game. This would see Carabao Cup games being skipped by some of the big teams, as well as huge changes to the Community Shield, both of which I'll get onto in a minute. But first I want to talk about the main proposal of FA Cup replays being scrapped from round 3 specifically. As we saw in COVID impacted seasons, FA Cup replays were scrapped, meaning all games had to find a winner on the day, rather than in another game in the away team's ground, which used to be a possibility until at least the quarter-finals, up until the pandemic. However, for the current season, replays have been brought back, this time for one less round. But some of the biggest Premier League clubs are still not too happy. Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp even stated that the lifelines for small clubs cannot be massive problems for clubs who play every 3 days, which is something I'll get back onto later. Before that though, I'll get onto my opinion on scrapping replays from the 3rd round onward, which is that it's an absolutely woeful idea. Now let me explain myself. It's not necessarily the general idea that's so bad, but instead the execution. Pretty much ever since live TV coverage of football started, the main and pretty much only benefit of the FA Cup replays has been to allow smaller clubs more money from potentially playing a second game against a Premier League giant, as well as for their fans who'd have the opportunity to travel to some of the biggest and most iconic stadiums in the country. Fans of my club Leyton Orient still speak about a 1-1 draw with Arsenal over a decade ago, because not only was it of course an impressive result, but also because it allowed us to travel to the Emirates, where we'd go on to lose 5-0, but it's still something that the Orient faithful look back on with pride. Now what this new ruling does is prevent something like this from ever happening again, but allowing potential fixtures, like Exeter vs Forest Green Rovers, to go to a replay, despite the fact that this game would never be televised. These two teams already play each other in the league, and it adds to a potential 67-game season for EFL sides. It's also another example of bending rules to help the elite, and creating further separation between fans, players and staff of those in the lower leagues, and those in the Premier League, which is already a huge problem we see today. If replays were being scrapped altogether, I'd have no problems at all, and if anything that would give lower league clubs a chance of progressing further, as there's a bigger chance for a worse team to win on penalties than it is for them to win after an extra 90 minutes. And most importantly, it would just mean that no matter whether people like it or not, everyone would be being treated equally. However, right now these plans would mean they're not. Now, onto the second talking point, which is the Carabao Cup being skipped by big teams. The plan is to reportedly allow Premier League teams playing in Europe to choose to not enter the Carabao Cup, or to allow their youth teams to instead play in it. Yet again, another terrible idea. To put it simply, without the big teams, the Carabao Cup is near useless for EFL sides. Even without the best 7 teams in the country being in the competition, there's no way a League One team could win the tournament, and so there's little to no point in it existing, as TV deals will be split in half and then eventually gone completely, as the number of eyes on the games worldwide will become a tiny percentage of what they are right now. And so, like I mentioned, it's just extra games with very little benefit for the teams lower down the divisions. Of course, one thing that has to be said is that it would allow smaller teams in the Premier League to win it, but to be honest, I don't think it's fair to benefit 13 teams over 72 lower down. And if they instead go down the route of allowing youth teams to play in the competition, the same effect will occur, just on a smaller scale. Furthermore, it would be just pointless to do this, because managers can just choose to select youth players in the competition as it is right now, whilst also keeping the financial benefits of having the actual senior teams technically in the competition. But they don't do that, do they? For example, Jurgen Klopp, who's one of the most vocal managers campaigning for things like this over the years, started just 4 youth players when they played Derby earlier this season, which makes his comments earlier, which in isolation were a great point that even I agree with, seem ridiculous. Finally, the last change would be to move the Community Shield elsewhere in the season, or opening it up to being played abroad, which I personally think is a great idea. I know I've been very critical of the idea so far in this video, which is mainly because they've come up with something that could be brilliant, but instead made it terrible. However, this idea, I can't complain with. To put it simply, the Charity Shield would be a waste of time for those involved in it, if we're talking financially, but its goal is to raise money for charity. And so by having it taking place before the season starts, it prevents those involved in it extending lucrative pre-season tournaments, which actually cost those further down the pyramid money in knock-on effects of football's current trickle-down economics, no matter how small the margin actually is. And so to put it later in the season, or in a different country to match these pre-season tours, would be fantastic, as it would generate more money, therefore giving more money to charity, which can only be seen as a good thing. And so unless I've misunderstood something in this aspect of the idea, it'd be great if this meeting allows this change to occur. Now let me wrap things up, as there's a few loose ends in this video. The reason that EFL and FA are even willing to talk about this is because the Premier League have agreed to donate significant sums of money to the EFL for the changes they're trying to force through. And so in that case, I think they might as well just get rid of the Carabao Cup completely if it's going to just become a youth competition, as it's barely useful in terms of progression of youth players anyways, as they're just going to be playing the same teams they already do in the EFL trophy. Secondly, if you're scrapping some FA Cup replays, just scrap them all. Don't keep them up until round 3. Nobody wants that. And before somebody comments, what about non-league sides who get replays against EFL teams? Would that not be the same thing as EFL teams in the Prem sides? And the answer to that is no. Average attendances in the 11th and 4th tiers are significantly closer in size than attendances in the 3rd tier compared to the Prem. And so it's far less of a spectacle for Notts County to play Hartlepool than it is for Burton to play Man City. And finally, any changes to the Charity Shield aimed at making it more convenient, as well as raising more money for charity, should be applauded and shouldn't be forgotten with all the bad things the football elite do. Finally, in conclusion, what I would do and what I hope happens is that the Carabao Cup stays exactly how it is now, and that managers should just start giving more youth team players their first team debut. It's a win-win for everyone. I would also scrap replays completely. It wasn't that big of a deal when they did it for COVID, and if anything, it would allow smaller teams to progress further and make them more money. And finally, I don't know if there's anything I'd change to the Charity Shield idea, unless of course I'm stupid and have misunderstood how it works completely. Also, I acknowledge I've definitely misspoken in this video, so leave a comment if you disagree with anything I've said, and I'll reply to try and clarify my point of view. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment nice things if you did enjoy. Links to all my socials will be in the description, so please follow. And most importantly, enjoy your day.